Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us. It is our weekend edition, and we are just thrilled to have in the studio with us today, first of all, Dr. Merrill Matthews, who's the resident scholar at the Institute for Policy Innovation, IPI.EDORG, I should say. Matter of fact, we're going to talk about one of the very important programs they have coming up, so you might want to go to the website ahead of time. And you'll also find one of his pieces that we've posted today, Are Republicans and the Constitution Diluting Minority Votes? So those are some things that you can find at IPI.org. And of course, if you go to FirstLiberty.org, you will certainly see the material there from our friends at First Liberty. And of course, we have the Director of Public Affairs, Lathan Watts. So good to have you here as well.
Good to be back.
You know, the other day we got talking about the police for a couple of reasons. First of all, there is the Back the Blue signing right now that the governor, Greg Abbott, has been using. But there's also a reason to bring this up, Dr. Merrill Matthews, as illustrated by something I guess was in the Wall Street Journal. Mm-hmm. And that is, we see the police chief here in Dallas stepping down. We see the police chiefs, they have different names, in Rochester and Seattle and other places stepping down. What's going on?
and what those all have in common are they're all black.
Yes.
And two, Renee Hall of Dallas and the police chief of Seattle were black females who were leading it. And I think they were both the first time a black female had led the police department. And so you've got people who you would think would be generally acceptable to the woke crowd, but they are getting pressure, all kinds of pressure. And just a few days ago, Renee Hall, having been on the job for 3 years now, following David Brown, who was a male black police chief who's now in Chicago.
Yes.
Having to resigning, and she's not told people where she's going. She says she's had a lot of options, and she's not revealing that yet. But it's got to be hard to be a police chief of a major blue city these days. And you would think if anybody could do it, black police chiefs would sort of be, we know you understand our issues, but apparently it's not working out well. And it's not clear to me that it's the police chief that are necessarily getting all these things wrong.
You know, last night, of course, was the start of the NFL, and we've seen this before. If a team does poorly, they get rid of the coach. That makes no sense. But I understand that's how the game gets played. But there is a sense in which you would expect, Lathan Watts, that they would be backed by at least the African American community, if not other parts of the minority communities. But when you say, well, we back you, but we're going to also take anywhere from $1 billion out of your budget, New York City, or hundreds of thousands of dollars out of your budget, which is Seattle and now Minneapolis and Dallas and some of the others, you can see why they say, see you later.
Yeah, and I think it's important probably to distinguish that these chiefs, the one that we're talking about here in Dallas and Portland, basically the entire command staff in Rochester that just walked out.
They all
I
did.
think they probably did enjoy support from the black community in where they were serving. But when you get down to the people on the streets throwing rocks and bottles and professional grade fireworks and railroad spikes and the like, those people the only color they see is blue, and that's the blue uniform that you're wearing.
Right.
And they don't care what color your skin is. If you've got the blue uniform on, you are the enemy. But it's interesting that the piece in the Wall Street Journal, points out, like Dr. Matthews was saying, you would think that if anybody could do the job and get support from their elected officials, the mayor and the city councils, it would be a police chief from the minority community. But clearly, it's not the case in these cities.
Yeah. Well, again, it's back to the city council. They're going to have to try to. Who's going to want the job after this?
Who's going to want that job now?
I was just trying to think. I mean, once you find yourself in a situation where you are the first African American female in that position, and you get thrown out, and you are then someone else down on the command staff, and I don't care whether you're African American, Hispanic, or white, male, female, LGBTQ, whatever. I mean, you just got the sense that there's just really no opportunity here, and there may be a lot of people that will say, thank you for the opportunity, and I will pass on that.
Yeah, and it's not just the senior leadership positions, it's the rank and file officers, too. I mean, was it de Blasio that had to put a freeze on people filing for retirement from the NYPD because the number of retirement requests went up by like 600% in 1 month? You wonder why. Yeah. I don't know why. Ask yourself, why would you sign up to do that job right now?
Yeah.
And we're talking about some of these major cities, but the three largest cities in North Texas, Dallas, Fort Worth, and Arlington, all are out looking for new police chiefs.
And so that also makes it very difficult when you realize that as well. And you would be going into a position where you know they are trying to reduce the funding. Some actually want to defund the police entirely. Yes. And that's another issue, because the argument out there on the street is that African Americans are fearful of the police. And yet almost every survey I've looked at, and there are more than a few, say that when you actually ask that question where there isn't just a lot of turmoil around it, most people in these black communities say, we maybe don't always feel good about the police, but we recognize without the police, it would be total anarchy.
And Governor Abbott of Texas has come up and said there's going to be some pushback against cities that are defunding the police. And I'm curious to see your opinions on this, because you can defund the police or you can dramatically reduce the spending. My understanding was that Dallas was, and Governor Abbott cited Dallas, is that they were doing a small cut to the police department. And I told my wife, in a time where you've got a lot of tax revenue not coming in now because of things, the notion that you say we've got to sort of everybody's got to feel a little pain here where we try to make ends meet. I know the mayor of Dallas has suggested, I think the mayor had suggested a 10% pay cut for the highest paid city employees. Maybe it was one of the councilmen. That didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to balance these budgets, I could see that as a budget balancing issue.
Well, and again, the mayor, to his credit, also said, look at the salaries of some of these individuals. The city manager in Dallas makes the same salary as Donald Trump. Of course, Donald Trump gives all his away. And so he said, maybe we should cut those salaries to fund the police. So I'll give him credit. Matter of fact, significant credit. Sometimes when he's been on some of these talk shows, people say, you just don't sound like the typical Dallas mayor that we've had in the past. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, it is, and it's one thing to take a look at a budget, like you said, in a time when revenues are down and look for cuts across the board. But even when you're cutting budgets in economic downturns, and I was part of a cycle of that when I was on the council in my little town in Louisville, you can still have budget priorities, and mine, police and fire were always number one. I mean, that, fundamentally, government exists to protect the God-given rights of the people, and they are the people out there on the streets protecting those rights. So I think, you could probably easily find other places to cut the city of Dallas's budget, including
some of those salaries.
Some of those bureaucrats who aren't out on the street protecting the public.
That's right. On the 19th anniversary of 9/11, talk about police and fire today is certainly a topic worth talking about. And when we come back, we'll get into some other issues there as well. But we just thought we'd pick that one because, if nothing else, it relates a lot to what's happening in Dallas, Seattle, Rochester, Minneapolis.
Yes.
The list goes on and on and on. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
A few weeks ago, one of my radio guests brought up a potential problem in this election that I'd never considered. Fortunately, this is something we can fix with your help. We may not have enough poll workers at the polls. Many states will face a shortage of thousands of poll workers this time because so many of them are older and face a potentially higher risk for the coronavirus. That may cause them to cancel their plans to work the polls for the election. Now, the process of attrition has been taking place for some time. Older retirees are the most likely demographic to work in America's polling places, but many of them are getting too old to work or even have died. They should have been replaced by younger workers, but that is not happening, and it looks like we will be short-handed. The citizens working the polls usually do it out of a sense of civic duty. After all, it isn't very attractive to the younger generation who don't have much interest in working 12-hour days for what is often less than minimum wage. Now, in a recent article, John Fund estimates that there should have been about 900,000 poll workers. These are individuals that are responsible for checking in voters, getting them the proper ballot, and answering questions. The shortage of poll workers could mean longer lines and many delays. Also, the Pew Research Center reports that a majority of poll workers in the last election, 2018, were age 61 or older. That is a demographic that is more vulnerable to the coronavirus and therefore less likely to want to work the polls. This is where you can help. You may be willing to work in the polls or know young people who would like to do so. You can contact your local political party and find out when the next training will take place. We need poll workers for this election, and you can volunteer and make a difference. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, if you would like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I was noticing that Lathan did something I've done before. Try to put your mask on instead of your ears in.
It's muscle memory. I reached for the earphones and picked up the face mask.
So many times I'm going, why do I have my mask on? I'm about ready to be on the air here, So I have done that before, and I was certainly laughing when I saw that you had done that as well. Plus, off air, we had some really funny things we were talking about that we won't probably talk about on the air, but we will come back to something that you mentioned just in passing, Dr. Merrill Matthews, and that is the governor, Greg Abbott, has a sheet which he's signed, and he's encouraged various representatives to sign, and that is to basically back the blue. Mm-hmm. And next week, we will have two individuals that have signed that. Now, we're going to have them on for other reasons as well, but one of those will be State Senator Angela Paxson. One of those will be Representative Candy Noble. They have both signed that, as well as Jeff Leach and Matt Shaheen. I can go down the long, long list of individuals I've been watching sign it on Facebook. But that gets into, can the next legislature begin to penalize individuals that are wanting to defund the various police departments, just as the president, Donald Trump, has wanted to penalize various cities that actually do not implement immigration laws, so-called sanctuary cities. And that's going to be a big issue, I think.
I think it may be, and my guess is the governor and the state government can. People, especially among conservatives, tend to think that the closer you are to the people, the better. So you want the independence from there. But the states created the federal government, mm-hmm. and the states created the counties and cities. It's the states that matter here. States matter, yeah. And they oftentimes have the ability to be able to tell counties and cities, you cannot do what you're planning on doing. I wish they'd tell Congress they can't do what they're planning on doing a little more often, but they have a lot of power to do those things. And, here in Texas or in the Dallas area, the county judge has at times wanted to be much stricter on the coronavirus lockdown requirements and so forth. And Governor Abbott came in and said, you cannot do that. So we'll be interested. The way the federal government typically does is by connecting it to funding. So if you do this, we will not provide funds for you to do certain things. The states don't always pass out a lot of money there, but they do have some power over them, and we'll see what happens.
Well, and again, that whole idea, the states are very important. You're a history major, and it's, again, something that even as I was speaking to some of these seminary students, you almost have to give them kind of Constitution 101, because some of the kind of history that we studied around the table isn't necessarily understood. And the states basically created the government, and the states created the cities. And as a result, their states have a lot more authority and power than many people even realize that they have if they actually used it.
Yeah, and I've been on the receiving end of state mandates as a local elected official. So nobody is more frustrated than getting an unfunded state mandate at the local level than somebody who's had to deal with it. That said, I totally agree with Dr. Matthews that that the governor and the legislature have tools at their disposal. And it may be, a funding mechanism like, hey, if you cut your police budget by X%, don't expect any money from the state for XYZ, fill in the blank. I think the thing that they've been talking about, though, is to say, well, if you do this, you're not going to be able to raise your tax rate without voter approval. Well, they shouldn't be raising the tax rate without voter approval anyway. That doesn't seem like much of a threat to me.
Governor Abbott, though, has suggested with Austin, and Austin is one of our more liberal cities in Texas, that he would come in and take over the police department there if they don't start doing some certain things correctly. So it's interesting for the listeners, when you hear your county and city officials talk about how they should have independence, they should be able to do what they want to, they all say that until it comes up that they have just completely messed up the police retirement plan.
Yes, there we go.
The city worker retirement plan and other things, in which they go hand out asking the state to come help bail them out from things that they have made a mess of. So even though they will stand up and say independence, local control, we don't want the state messing in our business, they change their tune quickly when they've messed something up there.
I would think so. A lot of people say, how could the governor take over of the Austin Police Department? I don't know. I remember a guy by the name of Judge Barefoot Sanders taking over the prison system in the state of Texas, which I'm not agreeing with, but I'm just saying, has there been a precedent? Oh, yes, there have been those kind of precedents, almost always on the liberal side, but nevertheless, it's been kind of interesting to see how that plays out. Okay, since we're talking history, we got to get to this one. Dr. Merrill Matthews, we have at least one writer for the Washington Post, and his inscrutable wisdom has told us that we have right now structural problems with the Electoral College. Oh, my goodness, haven't we heard that before? And then there's been the partisan meddling, gerrymandering, as if only Republicans do gerrymandering.
Right.
Have you looked at the congressional districts in the state of California, in a couple other places, North Carolina a couple of years ago, and all sorts of places in Massachusetts and all that? But nevertheless, you actually wanted to try to set the record straight, which I think you did a very good job in one page with lots of white space. And that's our first article on, are we diluting minority votes?
Right. And he made several arguments in there, and I was going to address all of them, but it just got too long for our IPI policy bites. But he wanted to say that we're diluting the votes through gerrymandering, through the Electoral College, which is going to be an issue, I suspect, again, that we'll see. And so I said, well, is that actually the case? So I went to the Pew Research Center, where they track minority votes, minority representatives in Congress, and they make the statement that we have the greatest minority representation in Congress that we've ever had. And in fact, over the past 4 elections, it has increased every time. And when you go back and look at this at the Pew Research, which I have a link to in there, going back from 2001 to that from that 107th Congress, I think it was, up to the current one. In almost every year, minority representation has either stayed level or increased. So the point I wanted to make is if Republicans are doing their darndest to try to keep minorities from going into Congress, they're doing a really poor job of this.
You know, one of the other things that you talk about there, I did a commentary a while back in which people were saying the Electoral College was racist and disadvantaged blacks, but I then give you quotes from people like Vernon Jordan, who said if you take away the Electoral College, the importance of the black vote melts away. So most of the leaders that aren't necessarily race baiting or something like that will acknowledge that because the minority vote, let's say there's 13% of the possible voters that are black. That's a little high because they 13% of the population, some are not registered, but let's just use that number, 12 or 13%. That would be insignificant in a popular vote. But it is really significant, as we said the other day when we were talking with Robert Woodson of the Woodson Center. He's pretty convinced that the black vote in Pennsylvania elected Donald Trump. And this time they did a survey saying that 27% of African-American registered voters approve of Donald Trump. Doesn't mean they'll all vote. If they do,
right,
the game is over. And so, again, the black vote actually is gaining an advantage with the Electoral College. True?
I think so. And it's interesting because what he wants to say is the Electoral College, the author Christopher Ingram at the Washington Post, it is an advantage for white, rural, and wealthy people. And I thought, especially from small states, and he cites Wyoming. So I said, well, let me just go. I didn't put this in the piece, but let me just go look and see the size of the states out there. If this is really the Electoral College's advantage to all small states that are white and rural. And so Wyoming is the smallest state. That's the one by population, that's the one he recognized. The next one is Vermont. Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders. In fact, if you go through the bottom 10 in terms of size, half of them tend to vote blue and half of them tend to vote red. So if the Electoral College is sort of disproportionately advantages smaller states, it's not really helping Republican states. It's helping Democratic states just as well.
Every year I go to Vermont because I am then speaking in New York, and we love going to Vermont. But whether it's Vermont or this statistic out of Maine was even funnier, there are more black bear in Maine than there are black people in Maine. And I'm pretty sure that's true about Vermont, too.
Yeah, it is certainly white, but it is it votes blue. So
it certainly does.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is a very good piece because if nothing else, I'm just all about educating people about civics because unfortunately that hasn't always been done in the public schools. I know the two of you would probably agree with that. And so in some respects, it's a way to take on a piece that shouldn't have appeared in the Washington Post, but nevertheless did anyway. So let's take a break. When we come back, we have a lot more to cover. But this is the first article, and it is one of those many articles you can find at ipi.org, and it is written by Dr. Merrill Matthews. And if you'd like to join us, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. We'll talk about some of the other issues in the news, and there's quite a bit. Matter of fact, we almost always end up leaving some for next week because we never cover it all on Friday. Let's take a break. We'll be back right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. First article, it deals with our Republicans and Constitution diluting minority votes, and I think we've already given a pretty good answer to that, but I thought we'd stay on it for a couple of more minutes. But before we do, if you go to the article we've posted, it takes you to ipi.org. Mm-hmm. Now, I could have posted the one in the Dallas Morning News, or lots of times we post things from The Hill or Forbes, wherever Dr. Romero Matthews writes, but I wanted to take you to ipi.org. iPI.org, because you have Ian Murray on with you September 24th.
Yes.
We have him on this program September 29th. And so we both think that this book, The Socialist Temptation, is a very good program. So for people that have done this, and I've done this before with you because you have these wonderful IPI events. And so if you click on to register for just a fraction of the cost, you can actually go to this conversation with Ian Murray. And in the past, it used to be that we'd only talk about it in Dallas because you had to go to it. But now any listener can actually follow it on Zoom.
It'll be a Zoom event, so anybody can listen in just as they can listen into you. What, on the 29th was it that you got it?
September 29th. So I'll listen to your interview first, as I like to do sometimes.
And Ian is with the Competitive Enterprise Institute.
Yes.
That's a long-established Washington group, conservative group that their primary focus is on environmental issues, but they do other things. But socialism is such a big issue right now.
Yes.
I'm even reading Milovan Gilas, I think his name, the new class. He was a communist from several years ago and came out and wrote a book. Got disappointed, as a lot of communists do, but he was involved in a lot of that and wrote a book in 1957, I think it was, about the problem with communism as it has developed. That was back in 1957, and it's still a problem.
Well, we're talking about IPI.org. They can find Are Republicans and the Constitution Diluting Minority Votes? But there's another piece there that I would point people to, which maybe we'll talk about in the National Hour in the future. Tom Giovannetti, But You Can Never Leave. It's all about California. Hotel California, is that right?
Hotel California,
you can check
yes.
out, but you cannot leave. And the point he's making is they're now talking about you can't make this up.
Imposing a wealth tax for somebody for 10 years, even after they move out of California. So if they pass this and you're wealthy and you move out of California, you would have to pay that tax for the next 10 years. Now, there's a question as to whether or not it's constitutional, because typically,
don't you think? Yeah.
Typically, the Supreme Court had said if you don't live within a state and you're not benefiting from the state's services and so forth, you don't owe any taxes in that state. But the Wayfair decision, which had to do with taxing internet sales, sort of opened the door up to allow that to happen. And so we assume the Supreme Court, if this ever made it that far, would say no, but we don't know that. I mean, it may change. And so the notion that you could move out of California, move here to Texas, and have to pay California's wealth tax for the next 10 years...
And it's a double penalty, because just to rent a U-Haul truck or U-Haul trailer, Tom points out, you pay a huge premium tax. If you want to move from Texas to California, no problem. We might even pay you to take it back.
You know,
the other way is high tax.
We had this issue in the Revolution, no taxation without representation. I would argue that Americans don't like taxation even with representation, but if that wealth tax were to pass and to stay effective, you could be taxed without you couldn't vote for those people who have imposed that tax on you.
So you can check out, but you can't leave.
Yeah,
right?
I was in California last weekend, and I'm leaving tomorrow to go back out there. We're doing some stuff for First Liberty out in California, so just sort of highlighting, because it's kind of ground zero for government overreach and violating religious liberty under the guise of the COVID-19 pandemic. So now I got to double check and make sure that I'm not spending too much time in California, that I don't have to start paying taxes out there. I know the hotel taxes and everything else that we pay just to stay out there are high enough, but yeah, that's absolutely mind-boggling to think that would even occur to someone. Like, they left, so let's tax them anyway.
Now, they already are taxing you if you're on Zoom. In other words, if you actually have a business in California and you now live in Texas, you are paying taxes because you are in a California business, even though you're not in the state physically. You start thinking about that. And of course, any of we got to talk about the NFL in just a minute, but any of these individuals that go, especially with Major League Baseball, and play in various stadiums, they oftentimes have to pay the taxes when they were playing for the Yankees, or they were playing for the Angels, or or whatever, the Giants, or whatever it might be. So I guess you could see that. But anyway, that's Tom Giovannetti, and that's another one at IPI.org. Let's go back to this piece real quickly, because we're having some fun today. And one of those is, there's an assumption, I'll go to Lathan Watts here. There's an assumption that Christopher Ingram is making, and that is that everything from gerrymandering to the Electoral College, but especially gerrymandering, says, well, if you gerrymander it so you have white voters, then there's the assumption that never could an African American represent white voters. Senator Tim Scott, call your office, because that's a good example of that, and I think there are many others. This identity
President Barack Obama representing the entire nation.
Yeah, so there's an assumption, there's a sort of an identity politics, intersectionality argument here, isn't there?
Absolutely, and it is the fatal flaw of this entire of the entire argument. It is based on the racist assumption that I could not effectively be represented by somebody unless they share the same skin color as me, and that's absurd. And I said it's racist, and it's a prejudiced point of view to think that if I ever ran for Congress, by the grace of God or something else was elected, that I couldn't sit down across the table from somebody who looks different from me and listen to what concerned them and take that into consideration when I went and cast my vote. That's nonsense. It's absolute. It's racial bias at its worst to say that only somebody who looks like me can listen to me or would care enough about me to listen to me and what is important to me and take that into consideration in the legislative body that they're serving in. Just like you said, Tim Scott, President Obama. I mean, all the number of ethnic minorities that are elected in Congress now, continuing to rise and rise. When are we just going to go back to Dr. King's dream of just being judged by your character and not by the color of your skin? When are we just going to say, you know what, I'm going to vote for the person who shares the same principles and the same values and ideals that I share, that in a Republican form of government, I don't vote on every issue. I vote on the people who do vote on it. And therefore, whoever espouses to me the same sort of philosophy or as close to mine as I can get, I'm going to trust that person to make decisions on my behalf. And I don't care what they look like. It seems to me that's what we have aspired to for a couple of centuries. And now we've just sort of canned that notion and gone to this just race-obsessed theory that I couldn't represent a district that was populated by a majority African American or Hispanic or Asian or vice versa. That if I lived in that district and the representative was Asian or Hispanic or black, that I somehow am being disenfranchised. It's nonsense.
So there's one other term I mentioned in the article, and that's disparate impact.
Yes.
And because discrimination is against the law, most businesses, I think, and people try to avoid that. So the question is, if you're not intentionally discriminating, but if we look at a business and they don't have the right proportion of African Americans or Hispanics or Asians or something like that, what they will say is, even if you aren't intentionally discriminating, you are probably unintentionally discriminating. Otherwise, you would have a representative percentage in your business or in your neighborhood or something of that nature. And so it's called disparate impact. Right. And so I asked the question, well, just raising the question in Congress, how does that look for African Americans? Well, African Americans are 13.4% of the population. In the House of Representatives, they're 12%. So you're getting real close to actually being the actual percentage that they represent in the country. So it goes back to this: how is it you're saying we're hurting the minority vote when you can't even identify disparate impact, which I don't think works anyway, with blacks in Congress?
Well, when we come back from the break, one of the themes that has surfaced from that idea of disparate impact is the idea of critical race theory. And the president has decided that he wants to defund that. So I want to get any thoughts that you might have about that, because if indeed we have obvious racism, then there are laws to deal with that. But are there maybe ideas that individuals are really unaware of their racist ideas? And the president has said that he's convinced that this idea of critical race theory isn't something we should support. So since we kind of stumbled onto that, let's get into that topic briefly and then move on to some others because, after all, we've got 2 more hours after this to cover all sorts of other issues, and we've posted lots of articles to talk about. We'll be right back after this.
As protesters in cities across America call for abolishing or defunding police, we wonder, who are these people? If Black lives truly matter, why defund the protection that helps minority-owned shop owners and businesses to operate in these cities? Charles Blaine heads up 2 nonprofits, Urban Reform, which seeks to offer solutions that will revive American cities, and Urban Reform Institute, its associated think tank. He points out that the movement to defund police has a crucial flaw. The policy that it seeks would harm the minority communities whom the protesters claim to care about. Moreover, he writes in City Journal, those communities don't even agree with it. He cites a recent Gallup poll, which finds that a large majority, 81% of Black Americans, want to see police presence in their neighborhoods preserved at current levels or increased. Black Americans also respond that their exposure to local police is slightly higher than the national average. 32% say they see the police very often in their neighborhoods, yet 61% are okay with that level, and 20% want more police protection. Police budgets are being cut significantly in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Austin, Seattle, Minneapolis, and Portland. Houston, Chicago, and Newark are maintaining, even increasing spending on law enforcement. Charles Blaine says there's a glaring differentiator between these cities. Those with Black mayors or many Black council members have opposed demands to cut their police budget. Riots, looting, and the destruction of property are ruining lives and livelihoods in many of our cities. Blacks own and work in some of these businesses. Ask them if they want the protection of law enforcement. It's often white hipsters from affluent neighborhoods who say they hate police and want them abolished. Radical Black Lives Matter protesters and rioters from outside the neighborhoods they are destroying don't care about the devastation if it advances their revolutionary agenda. As lawlessness increases, law-abiding people know we need police. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, one of the things I mentioned just a few minutes ago in Penna Dexter, if you listen to her commentary, which we just played, actually, interestingly enough, talks about that. A recent Gallup poll, sorry, Gallup's misspelled there, but that's okay, finds the largest majority of Black Americans, 81%, want to see police presence in their neighborhoods preserved at current levels or increased. Now, that is, I think, accurate, but it goes against the narrative we're hearing from the media. Black Americans also respond that their exposure to local police is slightly higher than the national average. 32% say they see police very often in their neighborhoods, yet 61% say they're okay with that level, and 20% want more police protection. Well, Lathan Watts, you wouldn't get that if you were just listening to the way in which some of the mainstream media covers the police, because most people in these communities recognize that apart from the police, you would have anarchy, wouldn't you?
And not only would you do.
Yes.
Just look at what's going on in Portland and Seattle and other places around the country. It's always it's been very interesting to me that the few times that some of these anti-police defund the police crowd that end up looting and rioting and all sorts of other stuff. When they actually do get arrested and they post the mugshots, it's a bunch of white people. It's a bunch of young, white, college-educated kids out there screaming about defunding the police from black neighborhoods. And I'm not surprised at the poll when you actually talk to the people who live in those neighborhoods. They're like, we want the police here. We understand the role of the police. Is it perfect? Of course not. No institution is, because all institutions are made up of imperfect people. Are there things that could be better? Sure. But do we want them to go away? Mm-hmm. Are you kidding me? Like, they're here in the neighborhood, and things are getting burned down. What's going to happen if they're not here?
Right. And so there's kind of an uneasiness in my racism booklet. I point out that if you're African American, you're anywhere from 2 to 3 times more likely to be stopped by the police, especially in some of these neighborhoods. So on the one hand, and I the other day was at an event where this African American said, when I walk with my wife through the neighborhood, no big deal. Or I've heard others say, if I walk and I'm African American with my daughter, no big deal. If I walk by myself, police cars come by me a little slower. I make sure I don't do certain things or go to certain places because you get profiled. I understand that. So on the one hand, they say, okay, sometimes we don't like the interaction we have with the police, but we also recognize very clearly what happens if the police force just disappears, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And all those encounters, I've never had an encounter like that. I don't have that. That's not a concern for me as a white man in America. I understand that.
Yes.
Okay. Every encounter with a police officer is a little nerve-wracking, no matter what you have done or not done.
Yes, it is.
When you get pulled over for whatever.
I got a smile from Dr. Merrill Matthews. I'm sure we got a story there, probably.
Everybody, my heart beats a little faster when I see those blue lights behind me, for sure.
Yes.
I start thinking, what's the speed limit here? Yeah. So I can understand some of that, but it still comes down to if you comply with what that officer asks you to do, you should not have any fear of how that encounter is going to end up.
Yeah.
And another thing people should look at, and it's not talked about enough, but when you look at a group of police officers, a large percentage of them are black.
Yes, they are.
A large percentage of them are Hispanic.
Mm-hmm.
It's you sort of get this notion that it's always white police officers out there who are doing this. In many cases, if you're seeing some kind of issue, you'll see a white and a black and a Hispanic, or sometimes an Asian and so forth. It's a very mixed group of people, and I suspect blacks and Hispanics are disproportionately part of the
I think so.
Police forces.
Just a minute ago, you were talking about sometimes the proportions don't work right. And so that's kind of gets maybe a little into the thing I mentioned a minute ago, critical race theory and all the rest, that if you don't see the right proportion, maybe there's bias or there's discrimination. But we recognize that you want to have opportunity for individuals, but the outcomes may vary. And a classic example is you have just a disproportionate number of white players for the NHL and a disproportionate number of black players for the NBA. Doesn't necessarily mean discrimination there, but they don't take that same kind of mindset into the world, and so that's sometimes used to evaluate employment, housing, or a variety of other things.
Well, we need a little affirmative action on the NFL so I can, or the NBA so I can get a chance. They need to lower the goal for me a bit, but
yeah, and so that's, I think, one of the fallacies there. We, as a country, and this is back to character and everything else, we want to provide an equality of opportunity, but we can't guarantee equality of outcome unless we go to a socialist country. And Bernie Sanders has an idea for that, but that's not exactly what most Americans embrace, right?
Certainly not. And you really have a choice. What do you value most? Do you value freedom or do you value equality? Because I can show you in every state, all 50 states in this country, I can show you a place in your state where there is total equality. No one has any more than anyone else. Everybody has free health care. Everybody eats the same food. Nobody has more than, and they all are completely equal. And it's in your state penitentiary. So that is the most.
That's a good line.
That is the most equality you will ever find.
Yes.
Okay. And it is the least amount of freedom you will ever find.
That's a good point.
So when free people are free to make their own decisions and live by the consequences of those decisions, it will result in different outcomes. Mm-hmm. The fact that the outcomes are different doesn't make them wrong in some way. If I had chosen a different major in college, or had not chosen to go to law school, I might be teaching history in high school, some high school somewhere. Or if I had gone on and basically my decision was between going through grad school as a historian and end up being a history professor or going to law school. If I was teaching history in some high school, I would not be making the same amount of money that I would make as a practicing attorney. Those are the results of decisions. It doesn't indicate some sort of systemic problem with our country. It's if you're free to make decisions, you're free to live with the consequences of those decisions, and the outcomes are not always going to be the same. It's the fact that did you have the freedom to make those decisions? That's what we should be promoting here. Not everybody ends up with the same amount of stuff. That's not what the American dream is about, how much stuff you can accumulate. It's about your destination in this country is not predetermined by where you started in this country. It doesn't matter who your father was or what family you come from. You are free to succeed or fail on your own merit, as far as your own skill and ability and drive will take you.
Sounds
That's
like
a good
Dinesh
thing.
D'Souza. We got Dinesh D'Souza on next week, and of course he's got this film coming out called Trump Card, and that's what he says. I didn't have a lot of choices in India, other than to do what my family wanted me to do, and even then it was very constrained. I come to America, look at all the things he's been able to do. So,
and when you look at choices people make, African Americans tend to choose in higher education, and social work more than health care. Asians, both Indian and Orientals, tend to choose healthcare, engineering, and other things. They make decisions like that, and you're not going to get as much if you're choosing a career in education.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, first of all, I want to talk about some of the religious liberty issues. I wanted to wait because we have our California listeners, and you were out there in Sacramento, and I've been there many times, especially when my dad was running for the California Assembly. And so we'll talk about that. You've got a good case out of the Navy, and so we'll certainly talk about that. We also then want to get into the election. Black Lives Matter to Trump. That's one of them. Trump voters remaining silent. No surprise there in the polls. Most Americans think the media is biased. Well, that's pretty obvious. So we got a lot to cover, and we will do so right after this.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition, and we are so thrilled that you can be with us over the next 2 hours. We're going to be talking with Dr. Merrill Matthews, who is a resident scholar with the Institute for Policy Innovation. And also we have in studio with us Lathan Watts, who is the Director of Public Affairs for First Liberty. And Lathan, let me put you on the spot for just a minute. We're going to talk about what happened in California. You just come back from the Golden State, and we mentioned last week when Kelly Shackelford was here that they were going to go out to Sacramento. They're going to have that First Liberty Freedom Tour. I've seen the van or the production facility that's on wheels, and you were out there at the Sacramento State Capitol. You even had some people come up and say, "I know who you are. I've seen you on Point of View," right?
Yeah, I was not expecting that in a crowd of thousands in front of the state capitol, while Sean Foyt and the praise and worship band were getting ready to start. And somebody walked up to me and said, "I recognize you." And my immediate reaction was, uh-oh. But she said, "I've seen you on Point of View before. Don't you come on Fridays? Are you First Liberty?" Like, "Yes, ma'am." And so we had a nice conversation. We are out in California.
It's kind of ground zero right now.
It really is. The pandemic has created a lot of work for us. We've been very busy. California is sort of ground zero for this sort of thing, with what's going on with John MacArthur's church and lots of other places. So we've been recently we've had a segment called First Liberty Live that we've done. We've done live, Zoom and Facebook Live interviews of different people, and it's been very popular. If you go to firstliberty.org, you can scroll down about halfway down the page. You'll find that section of the website. You can watch previous episodes and see some of the people we've talked to. And so we decided, well, let's take this show on the road. And so we're going to California with an ache in my heart, as Led Zeppelin would say. We took
we've got you three comedians out there, because the other two were Stuart Shepard, who's just a comedian, and then Todd Winking.
Todd Winking, our chief marketing officer.
Really, these guys, all three, could do stand-up comedy, by the way, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
We have a good time. Yes. They're out there now. I was out there last weekend. I'm going back out there this weekend. And it's really about just showing people, we call it, the faces, the places, the cases.
Yes.
This is what's going on in California. So we were there at the praise and worship service in front of the Capitol building last weekend. This weekend, the plan, I think, is to be on site at John MacArthur's church, which is in the middle of a little legal spat with
don't you know,
with Los Angeles. That could change. We're trying to be very flexible with our time out there. Like I said, we want to go where the news is and bring people perspective as to what's going on out there. So that's it. So just stay tuned. We'll be like I said, we're trying to be flexible. Occasionally, if something is going on, we say, "Hey, let's just go Facebook Live right now." But there'll be video and lots of content coming out of this very soon.
Again, firstliberty.org. Scroll down. You'll see, first of all, one on First Liberty Live, and then they got a picture of John MacArthur, and then Governor Gavin Newsom next to each other. I don't think the two have ever been that close to each other, but on the picture it looks like they are. And Dr. Romero Matthews, in the past, we've had John MacArthur on this program. I think very highly of him. I love his teaching. But I remember years ago he came out with a book that basically said Christians really shouldn't get involved in politics because it takes away from evangelism and the gospel. I don't think he's saying that right now.
No.
I think he's recognizing that there is a place to be salt and light in the political arena. And when we're not, then you start having kind of a cancel culture that he is facing right now in California.
And he's faced some significant problems there. And where is he right now? You're going to go see him maybe this next weekend, but what's the situation right now, Lathan?
Well, he, for I think something like, I want to say 40 years, they had a lease with the city on a parking lot, for his church, and the city's now revoked that. I think the latest thing from the city is he may have already been ticketed for having worship services. So that's part of what we're going to try to show to people is what's going to happen out there this weekend, if he's going to continue as he has, or I don't know if the mayor's going to send the cops out there to try to arrest John MacArthur or anybody who's trying to get into his church or not, but. My goal is not to get arrested, but to let people know what's going on.
But at least, I mean, it's bizarre in some senses. I mean, I assume if the city can repeal that lease that they have, I assume that's the case. But these cities, these blue cities, have not been nearly as critical about Black Lives Matter protests and other types of things. In fact, in many cases, they sort of said, yes, this can go on, but the church cannot. And that's created this disparaging a sense of you're just not treating the church equally.
That's exactly right, and that's really what is required of government when it comes to taking action, is that your action should be neutral towards religion. You can't treat it better or worse than any similarly situated organization. So, Sean Foyt, who did the worship service there, he's doing it because he's doing these things around the country because places like California, where Gavin Newsom saying you can't sing in church. And I'm like, where's the separation of church and state crowd now? Here's a government official literally telling people how they can and can't worship God. So he's gone, around to different places. And I think after Sacramento, he went up to Seattle, and originally was told he couldn't do what he wanted to do in the park. So I think they went to another park, and he told them it was a protest, and they let him in, and then they had their worship service.
Has the ACLU weighed in on any of these things?
Not that I know of. If they had any intellectual integrity, they'd be co-counsel with us on most of these things, but they don't. And they have basically publicly stated that they're going to be on the side of certain political agendas, not necessarily just defending the rights of everybody.
Sure.
So that's why we're going out to California. We did have a win recently, so I always like to give people good news. I hate always being the guy who's on here telling you all the bad things government's doing to religious people. But the U.S. Navy had originally said they were going to cancel a contract in certain places where there aren't chaplains of a specific religious background. They will sometimes contract with somebody from that faith who's local to come in and do services for those sailors. So in this instance, it happened to be there weren't Catholic chaplains, and so they had contracted to bring in Catholic priests from the community to come in and conduct mass for the sailors on the base. And they said they were going to cancel that. Well, that would have basically eliminated the opportunity for Catholic sailors on base to have a worship service. So we fired off a letter to the Secretary of the Navy. He was like,
"Excuse me?
I don't think so. I don't think you really meant this, did you?" And
that responded within 24 hours.
Yeah, within a day, they announced, no, that's no. We didn't really mean that. It was sort of billed as a financial issue, like they were trying to cut costs, and it wasn't us. Somebody actually did the math and showed that program was like 0.00015% of the U.S. Navy budget. And it's like, I think you can get by, keeping this program, and they are. So, thanks to the Navy for doing the righting the ship, so to speak, doing course correction.
So, again, challenge in California, along with the fires, the pandemic, the riots, and everything else, and then victory in the Navy. I want to get your guys' comments about the Atlantic. Jeffrey Goldberg and Bob Woodward's Rage and a few other things right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
A few weeks ago, one of my radio guests brought up a potential problem in this election that I'd never considered. Fortunately, this is something we can fix with your help. We may not have enough poll workers at the polls. Many states will face a shortage of thousands of poll workers this time because so many of them are older and face a potentially higher risk for the coronavirus. That may cause them to cancel their plans to work the polls for the election. Now, the process of attrition has been taking place for some time. Older retirees are the most likely demographic to work in America's polling places, but many of them are getting too old to work or even have died. They should have been replaced by younger workers, but that is not happening, and looks like we will be shorthanded. The citizens working the polls usually do it out of a sense of civic duty. After all, it isn't very attractive to the younger generation who don't have much interest in working 12-hour days for what is often less than minimum wage. Now, in a recent article, John Fund estimates that there should have been about 900,000 poll workers. These are individuals that are responsible for checking in voters, getting them the proper ballot, and answering questions. The shortage of poll workers could mean longer lines and many delays. Also, the Pew Research Center reports that a majority of poll workers in the last election, 2018, were age 61 or older. That is a demographic that is more vulnerable to the coronavirus and therefore less likely to want to work the polls. This is where you can help. You may be willing to work in the polls or know young people who would like to do so. You can contact your local political party and find out when the next training will take place. We need poll workers for this election, and you can volunteer and make a difference. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it is our Friday weekend edition, and we certainly encourage you to join us today if you'd like. 1-800-351-1212. We have in studio with us Lathan Watts, Dr. Merrill Matthews. Might just mention as a program note, next week we have Sarah Huckabee Sanders, we have Rafael Cruz, we have Michael Brown, Dinesh D'Souza, Max Lucado, Gary Bauer, and Phil Robertson of Duck Dynasty, to mention just a few of the people that we will have on next week.
That's a full lineup.
That is.
I'm excited about it, and I would hope that some of our listeners would be as well. But we have guests in studio today that can help us understand some of this. This has been a week in which I had some people, Dr. Merrill Matthews, say, I can't even keep track of all the hit pieces because you have Jeffrey Goldberg and The Atlantic. Supposedly, we did talk about that last week. We can come back to it again. And supposedly, the president said that these people that died are losers and all that kind of stuff. And we've set that aside, I think. But then coming on its heels, you've got Rage.
Right.
Bob Woodward, who's arguing that the president downplayed the pandemic. And some of the quotes that are in the book, which has yet to come out, but has been released ahead of time, look a lot like the public ones he's already said. And then, of course, you got Michael Cohen, the lawyer, disloyal, and you even have a whistleblower. So these are coming pretty fast and furious. Is that by accident?
Oh, and you have a new charge about him assaulting a woman from 20 years ago, I think it was. So that's That is, and I expect this to be almost a daily occurrence. I mean, it was just, what was it, a week ago that we were talking about the Atlantic article, and we're so past that now. We've moved on. And of course, in that case, you had umpteen people come out and say, including John Bolton, and I think Sarah Huckabee Sanders said, I was in the room, I was there, and it didn't happen. I expect this to be the Democrats' latest strategy of not just drip, 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 but pour, pour, pour as you keep releasing these kinds of things to sort of raise questions in the public's mind of, is Donald Trump the person we want to lead us?
One of the things I read from somebody else, which I had suspected, is I thought some of these maybe were more intended to be October surprises. Mm-hmm. You know, you might remember there was an October surprise for George Herbert Walker Bush. Probably the best known one was the October surprise that we found out George W. Bush had a DUI. But because the polls for the vice president seem to be dropping precipitously, and we'll talk about polls in just a minute, you get the sense that maybe some of this, which was supposed to be next month, are bringing it out right now because of some of the issues. Is that thought?
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all. And that also gives a little more time for anybody who's going to invent the next thing that gives them time to come up with something good for October. Well, let's use this now, and we'll get to working on the next piece for October. That's the beauty of anonymous sources, is that you can never check them because you don't know who they are. But on the Woodward thing, you know, I was mentioning this to y'all during the break, that anytime I watch anything related to politics, because of the work that I did, I always sort of look at it from the lens of the staffer, the people in and around the elected officials. That's what I did.
Sure.
And I always just feel sympathy for them, having done some of that kind of work. And my thought when I saw what was coming out, that Woodward had a book and the things there, was like, who thought it was a good idea for President Trump to sit down for 16 hours with Bob Woodward?
Yes.
And I totally get with a man, you know, what little I know of President Trump, that it would not surprise me at all if multiple people told him, this is a terrible idea, boss. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to sit down with Bob Woodward for 16 hours and I get it. If he makes up his mind to do something, he's probably going to do it.
Yeah.
But there's bound to be somebody in their office right now just beating their head against the door, like, just make it stop.
As somebody said, he out-Nixoned Nixon,
right?
You know, because there's tapes, you know. If you again, those of us that are old around the table remember that. The rest will go, what? I don't even know what you're talking about. But it is a good illustration of, as one person said, I work in the media, I believe in the media, I read the media, but I'll tell you that if I was working on a campaign and somebody said, I got somebody from the media wants to interview you, I'd say no, and double no, and, you know, all sorts of other things you can imagine you would say, because it just never turns out well, and it certainly doesn't. So,
and I think this goes to Trump's character in that I think he believes that here's the guy who went to go meet with Kim Jong-un. If you can meet with the head of North Korea, can you not sort of meet with with Bob Woodward? I think he feels like he has a certain personality and ability to be able to sort of win people over, give them his perspective, and bring them onto his side, at least to some extent. He may be wrong about that, but I think he's got the sense that I go and I meet with these people and I talk with them. I try to make friends with them. And even people like President Xi of China, he'll say, he's a great guy. We have a great relationship. He's doing some things we disagree with. But I just think he feels like he has that ability to be able to win people over. And I'm not sure everybody is winnable.
You've worked on campaigns, Lathan, and help us think this through. Now, I'm going to have to pretend to be on the Biden campaign for a moment, and I know that's a little bit of a stretch, but what was the goal, if you had one, for the Atlantic article? And it seems to me the goal was to try to not convince people in the military who are going to vote for Trump to vote for Biden, but just to convince people in the military, especially those overseas, about now ready to send in mail-in ballots, to say, if he doesn't like me, I'm not going to send in my ballot. Is that a possibility?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's in politics, there's it's called poisoning the well.
Yes. Where
you make the race so ugly, so nasty that it just turns voters off. And even, they may not vote, for your guy, but they just stay home. And that's just as good for you. If you're trying to depress voter turnout on the other side, you make the race as ugly, just as nasty, just as bloody, so that it's really just the hardest of hardcore partisans that are going to show up. And so that's a theory and it works.
Yes.
I mean, people wouldn't keep doing it if it didn't work.
Yes.
So that wouldn't surprise me at all if that was the case. I want to go back to something that Dr. Matthews said about Trump and his belief in his own ability to win.
Charisma, influence.
I definitely think that's part of probably what went into the decision to sit down with Bob Woodward. What it makes me think of, though, is he was able to, sort of smooth things over with Kim Jong-un and President Xi of China, which means that those guys aren't as ideologically committed as Bob Woodward.
That's a great line. Well, let's talk about the campaign since we sort of walked our way into it. One of the articles we've posted here is Black Lives Matter to Trump. Now, that was written by the staff of Red State. And what it's pointing out is that this administration, probably more than other Republican administrations, has really tried to do something to reach out to the African-American community. Shows a picture there of him hugging Alice Johnson, who was the woman that was in prison. And that led to, of course, the idea of prison reform and criminal justice reform. You look at the number of African-American speakers at the Republican National Convention, and that was pretty significant as well. And the argument they're making is it seems to be working because there aren't as many individuals who are really enamored in the African-American community with Joe Biden, although maybe they now like Kamala Harris. But if you take some of the latest statistics, all he has to do is do a little bit better. Last time, if you believe exit polls, and I tend to believe they're pretty accurate, he only got 8% of the African-American vote. Then we've had Robert Woodson on this program. Bob Woodson was on the other day of the Woodson Center. He's African-American. He made a prediction that he thought Donald Trump could get as much as 19 or 20% of the African-American vote. I rolled my eyes saying there is not even a chance. And then I see this poll out of Pennsylvania where right now, of the survey this just done, 27% of self-identified likely voters who are African-Americans said they approve of Donald Trump. That doesn't mean 27% would vote for him. But even if you get more than 8% and you win Pennsylvania and you win Wisconsin and you win Michigan, if you could tell me right now that Donald Trump gets 12% of the African-American vote, that makes the math work a lot better for him than it does for Joe Biden, doesn't it?
It's over. If he increased his percentage of the black vote by 4, 5, 6%, like you said, I mean, he won with only 8% of the black vote. If he got to 12, 13, 14%, and the reason why I can say that I think that means it's a done deal is because if you look at demographically where blacks live in America, they're, for the most part, in major urban areas. And in blue states, in many blue states, the major urban area outvotes the rest of the red counties in the state, and then that whole state goes for the Democrat. If he chips away at that and that popular vote margin then flips his way and he gets that state, like you're talking like Pennsylvania, you realize people aren't even talking about Ohio as a swing state?
No, they've given up on that. They're talking about Minnesota as a swing state. Where did that come from?
Right.
Yes.
We can talk about this more because I know we're coming up on a break, but from what I've watched and read and all this, I'm starting to think that this is either way, whichever candidate wins this presidential election, I think in the Electoral College it's going to be a landslide.
I think it's a possibility. We hope that it does, because we'll talk about what happens if it isn't. And then it goes into overtime. It goes maybe to the House of Representatives, maybe the Supreme Court. We'll be right back.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Dr. Merrill Matthews, Lathan Watts with us. And before we take some phone calls, because some of them are coming through, Dr. Matthews, you found this piece, which I thought was very good, and it's from Rasmussen Reports. Mm-hmm. And I think I've oftentimes felt that some of the better polls, the only poll that really counts is November 3rd. But some of them that are doing a better job of identifying likely voters would be certainly the Rasmussen poll. Mm-hmm. And then I've also, the last couple of days, talked about the Trafalgar poll because in some ways they were accurate last time. And then, of course, you have some other issues because they also bring in and ask about third-party candidates and probably do a little better job of figuring that out. But anyway, this piece, I think, illustrates exactly what we suspected. And we certainly knew that from 4 years ago, that when the polls were done, either telephone surveys or online surveys, a number of people that were planning on voting for Donald Trump probably just said, I'm undecided. And it turns out that that's happening again. Trump voters are staying silent again this year. It is our third article, in case you'd like to read it. And that's something you sort of have to factor in when you see some of these polls, right?
Right. And it's a tough time to be a pollster. I keep reading the articles from the pollsters as they say, here's what we're trying to do to make sure that we're coming up with an accurate estimate out there, because so many people don't answer their phone. I don't answer my phone if I don't know who it is anymore. And then if they leave a message and it's somebody I want to talk to, I'll call back. But I never answer any of those calls. And so that it's so hard to be able to get people to get a good random sample out there. You may very well be getting younger people, as you're calling on, and those may tend to vote or side with the Democrats more. That they tend to be a little more socially liberal and so forth. So it's a tough job to try to figure out how to do this, and especially as the demographics have changed. And we were talking about this a little earlier. I've been looking into the black vote, Hispanic vote, and so forth. And as Lathan mentioned, I think you said 12%, something like that. It's over. Tim Scott, back in February, Senator Tim Scott said if Trump draws, I think he said between 14 and 16% of the African American vote, it's over. Remember, back in December of last year, we were looking at like 3 or 4 polls that had Trump favorability among African Americans in that 30% range, and we were at the time saying, this looks like it might be an outlier. I'm not sure, but there was like 3 of them out there that had it there. Some of them are back there in that same general range right now. And I was just looking at another poll, which ironically said that just recently came out that blacks under 50 tend to be more supportive of Trump than blacks over 50, which in the white population is just the reverse.
Yes.
Or tends to be at least under 30. But one of those polls had black males under 50 at around 17%, supporting the job he's doing. It's just very interesting that you see some of these polls coming out getting Trump could fundamentally change this as more blacks and Hispanics end up voting for him. I don't think most of the mainstream media catch this, except I do see a few articles every now and then saying Democrats are getting concerned that that Trump is actually reaching out and having some success with the black voters.
Yeah, I think the story that you talked about people being unwilling to tell a pollster that they're going to vote for Donald Trump and then they actually go in there and vote for Donald Trump. A few years ago, I was in a meeting where Dr. Tom Coburn, from the former senator from Oklahoma, was speaking. Yeah. And he was the first person that I heard advance this theory. He was the only person at that point, because this was, like I said, maybe 3 years ago. People are still trying to figure out what happened in the 2016 election. And he was the only person that I heard say that, well, I knew he was going to win, that I actually believed that he did. And it was because of the reason that he gave. And he said, look, in the previous election, he's like, my state, Oklahoma, was the only state in the country that every county in the state went for the Republican. And Barack Obama didn't win a single county in that state. And he's like, and I travel all around Oklahoma, and I never saw a Trump sign, ever. Everywhere I went, I was all over Oklahoma, and I never saw a Trump sign. And he said, and I knew there's no way this state is is not going to vote Republican, but they're not telling anybody they're going to. And he said that was when I knew the polls are all wrong. There are people who are going to vote for this guy who just don't want to admit they're going to vote for this guy. And if that dynamic is taking place within the black community, and you can understand why when Joe Biden gets on a radio show and says, if you don't vote for me, you're not black. Well, you probably expect a little backlash if you admitted, that you weren't going to vote for him or that you were going to vote for Donald Trump. If that dynamic is playing out within the black community and his percentage of the black vote is underreported by polls, just like we said in the last segment, he won with only 8%. So that could be one of those election night exit poll surprises where the mainstream media is all shocked again if that's what happens.
I would be curious to hear if some of our listeners actually experience that, because I've heard several people say, I'll see one of my old friends or somebody I went to college or high school with say something supportive of Biden, and I used to go in and say something about that, and then I'd get so viciously attacked by so many people on Facebook that I just simply don't do that anymore. That's right. I suspect there's a lot of that going on, and I'd be curious to hear if some of the listeners are just saying, I'm just staying quiet about this because the other side has gotten so vicious that you just don't want to let people know where you stand.
In some respects, this is the reverse of what was called the Bradley effect. And for people that might remember that, Tom Bradley, African-American, running for mayor of Los Angeles, and there were people that were white who wouldn't admit to a pollster they were going to vote for someone else because they didn't want to seem like they were racist or something like that, or racially prejudiced or whatever. So the Bradley effect, it's also called the Wilder effect. The same thing happened in Virginia. But this is the reverse, that you're talking about. And it's just something to think about. And one of the reasons why I say, we don't take these polls too seriously, but when you found this piece on the fact that some Trump voters are staying silent this year, that is not too surprising. Also, they found some of the quietest individuals were people that aren't associated with either party, some of the so-called independents. Let's take some phone calls, though. We've certainly put some on the table here. And Gwen in South Carolina, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak. And one of the things I was thinking and pondering over, I used to be in radio myself, was the fact that George Bush, who was a conservative, had more African Americans on his cabinet than Bill Clinton did. And he showed himself to be very amicable to the African American community. Now, of course, my concern is not the Democrats or the Republicans in terms of what is happening to our nation, because it really won't matter who is in office if we're not going to respect and fear God. And I don't see anybody out front who's making an assertion that they are baptized, saved, love the Lord Jesus, and committed to that platform. And that's the only one I believe that offers us any hope for a nation, because the Bible says a nation who forgets God will be turned into hell. And we have forgotten God. Yes. And as far as the church goes, the church itself, in terms of racial issues, it should be the guideline and example because, God came to reconcile people to himself. And, of course, if you remember Herod Tetrarch and Pontius Pilate, none of those men were friends of the cross. And so I think for the church, the ministry of reconciliation across Democratic and Republic, I say this jokingly, Jesus won't come on a donkey or an elephant. He'll be on the right
my friend Tony Evans says, that the plane, the Air Force One, doesn't have a donkey or an elephant on it. And when we come back from the break, I want to get into that, because if you look at the four candidates, president, vice president, vice president, I see one that fits the criteria that she's talking about, and that would be Mike Pence. And I think most people don't know a lot about the spiritual and Christian convictions of Mike Pence. But yes, I think we've always said said, I don't know where Donald Trump is, although he has certainly been supportive of religious liberty in ways that I don't think Kamala Harris or Joe Biden would be. But it's a very good question, and I think that's an important one that many people are weighing right now. And I've also seen some people say, well, I just can't vote for any of them. Well, all right, but then when the next step says, I'm going to stay home, wait a minute. We got 35 U.S. Senate races, 435 races for the House of Representatives, 16 governor's races, and 43 out of 50 states have state legislative races. Yeah, you shouldn't stay home. Even if you can't vote for that first person on the ticket, there's all sorts of people you can vote for, I'm sure. Let's take a break, though. We'll talk about that right after this.
As protesters in cities across America call for abolishing or defunding police, we wonder, who are these people? If Black lives truly matter, why defund the protection that helps minority-owned shop owners and businesses to operate in these cities? Charles Blaine heads up two nonprofits, Urban Reform, which seeks to offer solutions that will revive American cities, and Urban Reform Institute, its associated think tank. He points out that the movement to defund police has a crucial flaw. The policy that it seeks would harm the minority communities whom the protesters claim to care about. Moreover, he writes in City Journal, those communities don't even agree with it. He cites a recent Gallup poll, which finds that a large majority, 81% of Black Americans, want to see police presence in their neighborhoods preserved at current levels or increased. Black Americans also respond that their exposure to local police is slightly higher than the national average. 32% say they see the police very often in their neighborhoods, yet 61% are okay with that level, and 20% want more police protection. Police budgets are being cut significantly in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Austin, Seattle, Minneapolis, and Portland. Houston, Chicago, and Newark are maintaining, even increasing spending on law enforcement. Charles Blaine says there's a glaring differentiator between these cities. Those with Black mayors or many Black council members have opposed demands to cut their police budget. Riots, looting, and the destruction of property are ruining lives and livelihoods in many of our cities. Blacks own and work in some of these businesses. Ask them if they want the protection of law enforcement. It's often white hipsters from affluent neighborhoods who say they hate police and want them abolished. Radical Black Lives Matter protesters and rioters from outside the neighborhoods they are destroying don't care about the devastation if it advances their revolutionary agenda. As lawlessness increases, law-abiding people know we need police. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, of course, Gwen raised a very good question. I know right now people are trying to make decisions about who they're going to vote for president. I hope that many of you will consider who you're going to vote for the U.S. Senate, because I want to talk about that next hour with Lathan Watts, because we, as we mentioned just the other day, now have a list of other potential candidates that would be on the Supreme Court and others in the circuit courts. And so you have 35 races, actually 33 races, and then 2 special races, which are taking place right now, which will ultimately determine whether or not those various judicial nominees will be pushed through easily or with great difficulty or not at all. But one of the things I thought, Dr. Merrill Matthews, I would come to is I would say, look at the 4 individuals, 2 president, 2 vice presidential candidates. The one person that sort of fits the criterion or criteria of Gwen is an individual Mike Pence, who is a born-again Christian and is a man of incredible character. You and I've known him. Matter of fact, you've probably even known him longer than I have. When I look at how he applies his Christian view to the issues and also the people he has put on the staff, he really stands out, and it's something to think about.
Yes, and if you're looking for the evangelical that sort of checks those boxes, Mike Pence would be the one to do it. None of the other three candidates, I would say, did that. However, what I will say about Donald Trump is he does surround himself at times with people with those kinds of convictions and views. Bill Clinton only surrounded himself with Billy Graham after various kinds of scandals emerged, and then he made sure that his press office released the notion that he was talking to Billy Graham, so that you would know that he's seeking spiritual counsel. But Donald Trump has been very open, having a very strong evangelicals around him. So even if he is not one, he certainly has those people around him at times to give him that kind of input.
Yeah, and I think he listens to him. I mean, I think it's almost evident in the policies that he's put out, in the executive orders, and the direction to protect religious liberty and all agencies of the federal government, in how he talks about religious liberty. I watched not every night, but quite a bit of the RNC, and we were talking about this around the office. Like, when was the last time? And I've watched almost every RNC since I was, the dorky kid in third grade who watched the news and couldn't wait to vote. I don't recall a Republican National Convention where I heard the name Jesus mentioned as many times as I did in this most recent RNC. Now, that doesn't necessarily, reflect whatever Donald Trump's personal religious convictions are, but it does reflect that he is not afraid of it.
Right.
He was willing. I mean, I guarantee you, he's in charge of that convention. Okay, if there's anything around about Donald Trump, he's in charge of it. And if he had a problem with it, it wouldn't have made it on the stage. Mm-hmm. And it was all over that convention. And I think you can even see, like I said, in some of the policies that he's done. I was listening to the radio on my way in here, and they were playing a clip of his rally, I guess, yesterday. Yeah. And the crowd just spontaneously started chanting, "We love you." And he interrupted them to say, "You're going to make me cry, and that would be bad for my image." I don't think... I think actually the people of deep conviction around him are having an impact on him. And I think just in something like that, he made a joke about it, but he was touched emotionally by that. And yeah, I think Mike Pence could be sort of almost like a sleeper issue in this election. If there are people who would not vote for Trump the first time, okay, for name your reasons, okay, if you're a conservative, you're on the right, who really like Mike Pence and who would really like the notion of the possibility of a Mike Pence presidency on the heels of a Trump presidency. If those people who just could not bring themselves to vote for Trump last time, if enough of them show up to say it's more likely that Pence has a real shot at winning and having a term of his own if Trump is reelected, so I will hold my nose and check the box this time. It's not just people in the middle or the undecideds or the black vote that we've talked about. There's a number of votes on the right that didn't show up for Trump last time that potentially could this time.
A lot of never Trumpers, yeah.
And if a significant number of them make that leap because of a guy like Mike Pence, it could be a very interesting night on election night.
Let me just mention, too, some of you probably get the newsletter from James Dobson and the James Dobson Family Institute. Of course, he has the James Dobson Family Talk. Written a very good piece about Donald Trump and how he kind of thought that through. So I would commend that to you. But just before I take a break, we were talking about the fact that some of the voters are staying silent on this issue. So I thought we'd go out to California. KYCC. Gloria, what would you like to add to our conversation?
Hi, yeah. With the polls and how we aren't doing those polls, at least Republicans don't seem to be. I don't necessarily think that we are ashamed of our vote. It's that we don't really want to show our cards. Like in the 2016 election, Democrats were completely shocked because the polls did not add up to our 2016 election. And I think it's especially important now for this election with worrying about fraud, that if Democrats know how many votes we have, then they're going to want to counteract that, right? But we're staying silent on an issue just so possibly the same thing can happen in 2016, this time around in 2020.
Yep. Again, they don't want to know how many votes so they can manufacture it. That's what I thought she was going to say.
They know how many votes they need to manufacture.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder if that's what she was going to say. Because this whole issue of the mail-in ballot, this is just getting out of hand, is because we just have so many more individuals that are going to be voting by mail. It's gone from, in round numbers, about 30 million individuals that voted by mail last time, and that's primarily because of the states that actually have that. That'd be Oregon and Washington, Colorado, Hawaii, places like that. But now they're talking about 80 million, but it's almost a 2-to-1 where Biden voters most likely are saying that they'll vote by mail compared to Trump voters. Well, if you look at the statistics about the number of ballots, mail-in ballots that have been actually discarded, and these are almost all in Democratic primaries, and if that trend continues, you can see that in some respects, the quickest way to make sure that your vote doesn't count is to vote by mail and make a mistake. So I'm saying if you're going to vote by mail, first of all, get the ballot really early. Make sure you fill it out carefully. Make sure the signatures match. Make sure you get it postmarked early, because I just got a feeling we're going to have quite a controversy. And come the night of November 3rd, I'm not sure we know who the president is.
Yeah, I mean, what important correspondence in your life do you trust to the U.S. Postal Service right now? I mean, if it's really important to you, you use FedEx or you use UPS and get a tracking number and you watch it. You can track it on your phone and you know the moment that it gets there. I always like, sit down and try to figure out a dollar figure of what your vote is worth to you.
Yes.
How much money is that? Put that money in an envelope and mail it somewhere.
Yeah.
Would you just stick it in the mail and trust? I get,
Good
some people, there are, physical limitations. I totally understand that, and that's exactly why what Kerby, what you were saying is what people should do. They need to request it early. Be very meticulous about it, and make sure that it's delivered in plenty of time.
But first best is just to go and vote in person. You go to the grocery store and you go to the laundromat. Some of us go to that, or you go to the church in some cases, and you go to even getting your car repaired. And then all of a sudden you say, I can't go and stand in a line. In many cases, there's no line because there are so few people that vote.
They're expanding early voting in most places.
Mm-hmm. And you can vote in and out and have no problem at all. So don't tell me if you're going to a restaurant and a grocery store, you can't go vote.
Exactly.
Let's take a break. We got a lot more to cover. We'll talk about the Senate races because that's important too, right after this.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, and we are privileged to have in studio with us today Dr. Merrill Matthews and Lathan Watts. And one of the things I wanted to talk about briefly is the Senate elections. Now, the presidential election is very important. Many of you are in a state where there is a Senate election because, after all, we have a record number. We have 33 U.S. Senate races and then 2 special ones, so 35. And so, in some respects, I want to talk about that in a minute, but I thought we'd come to Lathan Watts for a minute to talk about why the Senate is so important, because we think of the Senate for a couple reasons. One, treaties. Don't know too much about that, although it's been interesting to see some of the things that current President Donald Trump has been able to address, and some of the things that, if indeed he was elected, Joe Biden would want to do. But the bigger issue is the fact that more than 200 individuals have been placed on the federal courts, 2 on the Supreme Court. You have 2 rather elderly individuals, Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Stephen Breyer, both in their 80s, also Clarence Thomas. And so that's important. So before we talk about the Senate races, talk about why the Senate races are almost as important, in some respects more important than the presidential race.
In some aspects, yes. It's a challenging map for the GOP majority because they have more seats to defend.
True.
And like you said, it's a large number this time, and it's designed so that you don't completely turn the entire Senate over every 6 years the way you could completely turn over the House every 2 years. So in one instance, the Senate is important because it was designed to be the chamber where the terms are longer. You don't have as large a turnover each election cycle, and whereas the House is the one that is sort of perceived as the one that is more reflexive and quicker acting to whatever is going on with the people, and that a knee-jerk reaction bill to something sometimes cools off in the Senate, and that the Senate is sometimes where bad bills go to die. So who controls the Senate is very important, and just from how legislation moves, as you mentioned, treaties or trade agreements and that sort of thing. But then the issue of nominating and confirming federal judges. As you said, a record number of judges have been nominated and confirmed in Trump's first term. Overwhelmingly, with very few exceptions, they've been really good candidates, at least from the perspective of how they would rule on religious liberty. And the reason I know that is because we evaluate the record of every person that's nominated, only for that issue, because that's the only issue we litigate. Somebody else can worry about the Second Amendment and the Fourth and Fifth and all that, but that's the only kind of work we do, so we want to know where they are on that issue.
What about the list that we just talked about the other day, an additional 20, so this is in replacement of, but in addition to? I'm looking down that list, Lathan. These are people that have worked with you, right?
Some of them, yes. Some of them in either earlier in their career when they were in private practice, were a volunteer attorney that worked with us on a case. Jim Ho, who's now on the Fifth Circuit, he was one of our most active volunteer attorneys before he was confirmed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Sure. So if he were to be, nominated for the Supreme Court, he would be
you could sell
back in black,
tickets,
so to speak. He'd be back in black. He would be nominated again, this time to move up to the Supreme Court. And just from my own personal opinion, he would be outstanding. If you've ever,
he'd be the first Asian on the court. He also would be more like a Scalia because his the Wall Street Journal said the other day his opinions sound like or read like op-eds because he does have
that aspect,
strong
yes,
opinions.
In that aspect, I would say he's like Scalia. From where he stands, in jurisprudence, I would say he's probably even closer to Thomas.
Yes,
he's. Which is why the other side is
not thrilled
about Jim Ho being on even the Fifth Circuit, let alone where he'd be nominated to the Supreme Court.
And then Paul Clement is one that you have used. He almost always, not always, but most of the time, seemingly argues many of your cases before the Supreme Court.
Paul Clement, former Solicitor General, I think probably has argued more cases from the Supreme Court than any lawyer in America.
Very true.
And just a brilliant attorney, and. When we had Coach Kennedy's case up on appeal to the Supreme Court, he had they taken it and gone to oral argument, he had agreed to argue that case for us. So we're now back down to the Ninth Circuit with Coach Kennedy and waiting. We've got our briefs filed and we're waiting on the other side, and we might be going back to the Supreme Court. So I would hope maybe he would still do that now that he's out on the new 20 list. I don't know, but yeah, there are names on there. I mean, Ted Cruz is on there. Ted Cruz, volunteered and worked with us back when he was, practicing law. So there's some great names on that list. In addition, and these are not really to replace anybody that was on the old list that he put out. And these are sort of in addition to.
You mentioned that the Senate had some functions that were important. Treaties were one of them. Of course, it is the Senate has been sort of the take a breath chamber of Congress. We're gonna go a little slower here, and because of that, Barack Obama went out and made a treaty with China, made a treaty with Iran, and made a treaty on the Paris Agreement.
There you go.
All of which none of which got Senate approval because of his they would want to demand some certain things that he couldn't feel like he could give in his. But we talked about the courts, but the other thing that's important about the Senate is the filibuster.
Yes.
And the filibuster, the ability to be able to delay legislation or postpone it or just kill it simply by having to go through to get 60 votes to be able to proceed to discuss, to vote on legislation. They oftentimes can't get that. If Democrats win the Senate, it's the filibuster, at least on legislation. They've already sort of done away with it for nominees, but with the legislation is probably going away. And if Republicans keep it, the Senate, they probably retain, I think, the filibuster, even though a lot of Republicans like to see that go away. I'd like to see them retain it, even though I'd like to see it change to get back to more of a real filibuster kind of thing.
Yeah.
But having said that, if the Senate is no longer the go-slow chamber if they get rid of the filibuster.
Right. And again, when we look at these cases right now, most people think that Republicans may pick up Alabama. But so then the real toss-ups tend to be Arizona, Colorado, Iowa, Maine, and North Carolina. In order for the Democrats to control the Senate, they'd have to win all 5. I'm suggesting, and this map doesn't have it, that there's another possible toss-up state, and it's Michigan, John James. And if that's the case,
they're neck and neck right now, I think.
Yeah, so in some respects, what it says is, of course, anything can happen in the next 50-plus days. You'd almost have to have Democrats run the table of the toss-up states, which is like trying to get an inside straight. Does that happen? Yeah. I mean, President Trump sort of did that in 2016. But it's, again, one of the things that we don't talk about every day because it's a national program, but we're not ignoring the fact that in your state, that Senate race may be really important. If for no other reason, it's going to make Kelly Shackelford and Lathan Watts' life a lot easier if you're trying to move through some of those nominees that you think so highly of. Let's take a break, though. We have a lot more. We have a poll that suggests the media is biased. Oh, I know that shocks you. Also, what happens if neither Trump nor Biden win the Electoral College? And a couple of other issues we'll put on the table. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
A few weeks ago, one of my radio guests brought up a potential problem in this election that I'd never considered. Fortunately, this is something we can fix with your help. We may not have enough poll workers at the polls. Many states will face a shortage of thousands of poll workers this time because so many of them are older and face a potentially higher risk for the coronavirus. That may cause them to cancel their plans to work the polls for the election. Now, the process of attrition has been taking place for some time. Older retirees are the most likely demographic to work in America's polling places, but many of them are getting too old to work or even have died. They should have been replaced by younger workers, but that is not happening, and looks like we will be shorthanded. The citizens working the polls usually do it out of a sense of civic duty. After all, it isn't very attractive to the younger generation who don't have much interest in working 12-hour days for what is often less than minimum wage. Now, in a recent article, John Fund estimates that there should have been about 900,000 poll workers. These are individuals that are responsible for checking in voters, getting them the proper ballot, and answering questions. The shortage of poll workers could mean longer lines and many delays. Also, the Pew Research Center reports that a majority of poll workers in the last election, 2018, were age 61 or older. That is a demographic that is more vulnerable to the coronavirus and therefore less likely to want to work the polls. This is where you can help. You may be willing to work in the polls or know young people who would like to do so. You can contact your local political party and find out when the next training will take place. We need poll workers for this election, and you can volunteer and make a difference. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you would like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I suspect this will generate some phone calls, although you're certainly free to just sit back and listen to these two articulate individuals we have in studio today, Dr. Merrill Matthews and Lathan Watts. But our fourth article, which you can find, it comes from the Daily Caller. It's a poll that was done by Gallup Knight Foundation. 86% of Americans say the media is biased. Okay, nobody's too surprised by that, other than it's 86%. I have looked at polls from previous decades that weren't even in the same banner, or even in the same order of magnitude. There was, again, since I'm the old guy around the table, a time when if Walter Cronkite said it, it was true. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't really any dissent about that. And people tended to have pretty significant trust in the three major networks, the so-called major media. When you start looking at 86%, you're recognizing, sure, this poll shows that Republicans distrust the media more than Democrats. No surprise there. And the numbers there would be very helpful for some of you to post on your Facebook account or your Twitter account when people say that. And it also, this may sound like it's self-serving a little bit, is one of the reasons why I wanted to remind you of the fact next week we have Truth Team, because one of the things we really are trying to do is give you the facts. And if the facts go in a way that we don't like, we're going to tell you the truth, you know. But as we pointed out earlier, when you have these pieces of information coming out, let's say The Atlantic, owned by Stephen Jobs' widow, you know, The Atlantic is not The Atlantic it was a couple of years ago, a couple of decades ago, when you have Jeff Bezos owning the Washington Post. You know, there's a sense in which you're not getting the truth. And so some people say, well, then who owns Point of View? The listeners do. The donors do. We're responsible to you. And as you know only so well, Dr. Merrill Matthews, every issue's on the table, and that is part of it. But then as you turn the page, Jordan Lancaster not only talks about why the media is seen as biased, then he posts one of Donald Trump's Twitter posts, Biden getting softballs and actually reading answers from the teleprompter. What's that all about?
And that's absolutely right. It's amazing what has happened to the media, because those of us in the sort of the conservative movement have long felt like the major media have been biased to the left, but you thought maybe they were trying to do a fair job. That's out the window. I mean, I don't even see them trying to do a fair job of reporting on most things. Maybe something, if it's sort of not political, you might get some kind of fair journalism going on, but most of this stuff is just, and then you see it in their Twitter feeds. I mean, many of the journalists are just viciously anti-Trump, anti-Republican, and so forth. And there have been so many things over these past 4 years where Donald Trump would say, they're listening in to me. They're at the hotel. They've bugged the things and we're listening. And you think, and then you find out it's apparently true.
Yes.
It's amazing stuff.
Yes. And you mentioned Twitter. I'm seeing more and more of these reporters just using Twitter to do the reports.
Yes.
You and I are old enough, this guy's still kind of young, where we would sometimes get a call from National Public Radio, Dallas Morning News,
I used
Wall
to do
Street
commentaries
Journal.
on National Public Radio.
Yeah, well, I've done some of those too, more UPI. But anyway, we would have a reporter come into our office and do an interview with us.
Right.
I can't even remember in the last couple of decades when that happens. They're just getting their information from Twitter, and they're just talking to each other, which is called a silo, which isn't necessarily doing reporting the way it was done.
And of course, the thing that you have right now is if you leave a Democratic White House, you go to work for CNN or New York Times or something like that. If you leave the CNN and New York Times, you go to work for a Democratic White House. It is so close there that it's the relationship is just incestuous.
Think about what Trump pointed out when he said Biden's reading his answers off the teleprompter. Is that true?
Is that really? Yeah.
And he's getting softball questions and he's reading his answers off the teleprompter. In order for him to be able to read an answer off the teleprompter, he had to know what the question was ahead of time.
You bet.
So not only is he just not getting tough questions, they're giving him the questions ahead of time, because that's the only way you can have an answer prepared and loaded into a teleprompter, and he still manages to screw it up, and nobody covers that either. I don't know. It's a toss-up. Worst job in politics right now: speechwriter for Joe Biden or sign language interpreter for Joe Biden. I fully expect at some point you're going to see that little person down in the corner of the screen just shrug their shoulders like, sorry, folks, you're on your own. I got nothing.
Oh, that's incredible. Another great line from Lathan Watts, which we have been collecting over the years, but a good example of that.
Sometimes I can't help myself.
But again, this is not the way it used to be. And so as a result, you hear phrases like fake news and all that, which I think don't help advance the conversation. But I think it really illustrates something I was trying to point out yesterday, and that is when you see these headlines, read past the headlines. We posted an article by Michael Brown pointing out that it turns out actually more people were watching the Republican National Convention than the Democratic Convention. You find me a headline that says that. You won't find one, but that is the case. Or the one yesterday, 250,000 individuals infected with the coronavirus from the Sturgis, South Dakota motorcycle rally. 250,000, and it's going to cost us $12 billion. And I'm supposed to look at that and shake my head and go, oh, isn't that sad? It's hard to even see some of those headlines and believe that they were done with somebody not thinking they were working for the Babylon Bee or the Onion.
But are you finding any news stories about how many COVID cases were spread during a major protest?
Not exactly. Not hardly.
Are you seeing many headlines about the number of cases, period?
No, and that's because the number of cases have been going down.
Yeah, so that's a good one. Which brings us to our next article, which I thought you I know that wasn't a segue, but it's a perfect one. Democrats are scared to death of the coronavirus vaccine. Now, I didn't really follow that until I was realizing that the other day, the vice presidential nominee, Senator Kamala Harris, was asked if indeed, if the vaccine were available, would she take it? And she said, well, I think that's going to be an issue for all of us. I'll say I would not trust Donald Trump. Okay.
Donald Trump is not making the vaccine.
He's not working for AstraZeneca.
Donald Trump is in the Oval Office with a home chemistry set, mixing up vaccines.
Hydroxychloroquine with vaccines.
Exactly. Yeah, sorry.
Well, the point is that, first of all, there are some reasonable concerns, aren't there, about usually how long it takes to produce a vaccine. We're going to have our expert here. Dr. Merle Matthews knows this only so well, having researched this for years and writing about this. And so to get a vaccine ready within a year is really pushing it. We recognize that. There are a fair number of listeners that say, I wouldn't take a vaccine even if it were for something else. But it has been interesting to see that if you're a Democrat, you're more likely to say, I don't trust Trump. And now you have the vice presidential nominee saying, even if they have the vaccine produced by AstraZeneca, Moderna, from Oxford, wherever it might be, I'm just not sure I would trust it. And what does that mean in terms of the lockdown and the pandemic?
Because the U.S. government does not control the healthcare system, private sector companies who have been doing this for decades are the ones who are making the vaccine. And they may be talking back and forth with the National Institutes for Health, the CDC, and others, but it's private sector companies that are doing this. They have a lot on the line. Nobody wants a safe, effective vaccine more than the companies because their reputations are on the line. They have a lot at stake here, and they're trying to do it as fast as they can. The notion that AstraZeneca had one person come up here just recently having an adverse reaction, that happens in there. And I've been in these meetings where doctors, when there's been a disproportionate number of adverse reactions, not one, but a disproportionate number, are going back and forth, wondering and discussing, was it because these people were sick? Did we get a bad, a disproportionate number of people who were too sick or should not have been in this, and so forth? Those kinds of things go on, and the experts don't always know. But one person having an adverse reaction is not a bad problem. That's just something you want to look at and you want to move forward on.
Well, and the sad reality is the argument right now is, well, they are rushing it. Trump is rushing it because he wants to win the election, which is kind of like, hydroxychloroquine, works only because Donald Trump says it does, but it really is dangerous. And it's just a good example of that.
And Trump may be rushing it because he'd like people to have the vaccine.
Yeah, it could be. That's another possibility. Everything gets politicized, doesn't it?
Everything.
So we'll come back just to maybe spend a little more time on this after the break. You've looked over the years of how difficult it is to get anything, a drug or vaccine, to market. And I think it's worth covering one more time because you've done some of the research on it. And so we've got Dr. Merle Matthews. And then I think it's about time to talk about what happens if neither Trump nor Biden gets the Electoral College votes, and if it goes to the House of Representatives, and what does that mean, and whether or not this election goes into overtime. We've got lots more to cover, and we will do so right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
I'd like to join our question and our conversation here, 1-800-351-1212. If you've got a comment or a question, we certainly welcome you. And again, we have Dr. Merle Matthews as well as Lathan Watts. The 5th article on the website, Democrats are scared to death of a coronavirus vaccine. Now, Derek Hunter's doing it both ways. They're scared that once you have the vaccine, a lot of people will say, I think the pandemic is over, and also scared to actually take the vaccine. So you can read that in its entirety, but I thought it was surprising to me, but I guess I should have seen it coming. But let's come back to this comment that I don't trust Donald Trump. I just won't take his word for it. Well, you don't have to take the word for it from the President of the United States. You might want to take it from one of the individuals on the coronavirus task force. But as you pointed out, Dr. Merrill Matthews, pharmaceutical companies spend years, sometimes decades, and millions of dollars to get a drug or a vaccine to the market. And they've had experience doing this.
The average time, it runs 10 to 12 years from the time they come up with the idea to the time that they're finally able to get it through the FDA approval process. Typically takes about $1.6 billion to do that. And that's not... You can do the math. You go and look at the number of drugs that are approved every year. You divide that into how much, because this is a revealed number for the taxes, how much they spend on R&D, research and development, and then you sort of smooth that out by taking it over 10 years or so, which is what I've done, and it comes out to about $1.7 billion per drug. Now, that doesn't mean that they spent that much on each drug, because some of that money is going to try to find cures for other things. Pfizer a few years ago said, we've been working on trying to find a cure for Alzheimer's for decades, and we've spent millions and millions of dollars, and we're not any closer to finding a cure, so they decided to pull out. Lilly at the same time said, we're staying in to try to find something. They spend a lot of money on these things that we want them to find cures for, but they aren't always successful, and sometimes it takes a long time. So typically you're looking at 10, 12 years to get something done. They're trying to do this in less than a year. It'll probably end up being about a year to go from when they first started this process, because many of them saw this back in December and January and said, we're getting started on the process now. The government didn't have to put any money up. They had money in the capital that they were throwing at this. So it's the companies, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and several others. Johnson & Johnson is looking at trying to get one. I think I saw the number of about 35 out there right now. China and Russia are trying to do... Now,
Russia says they have one, but I don't
Kamala
believe it.
had said, I'm nervous about taking the Russian vaccine, I'm with you, Kamala.
I'm with you on that. I'm with you. And again, this is all part of Operation Warp Speed.
Right, where they're trying to move this very, very quickly.
And again, can we at least give some partial credit to the President of the United States, who says instead of trying to find a government solution, tries to find a private sector solution, right?
On March the 2nd, the same day that the governor of New York, Cuomo, was saying, we don't have a problem in New York, we're fine, don't worry, we got this thing under control. Donald Trump was meeting with the heads of the drug companies to try to talk with them about and telling we're going to provide some funding, we're going to help you out here, get going as fast as you can. Many of them had already started, but several of them are working. That was a sort of his effort to do that. That was on March the 2nd, before we even had a national emergency. It was 11 days later that they declared a national emergency. We'd only had 6 deaths by the time he declared a national emergency. So they've actually pushed this fairly quickly. It's a long, difficult process. They want to try to make sure it's safe. They know this is politicized now, so the drug companies are coming up and they released a statement saying, we aren't going to release something unless we feel like this is both safe and effective. That was the news that came out earlier this week, as they're trying to sort of squelch down the Democratic response of, I'm just so concerned about this, I don't want to take the drug because I think they're rushing it through.
Yes, and I might just mention that yesterday my Viewpoints commentary is where I quote you, which you had actually pointed out that on March 2nd, when New York Governor Andrew Cuomo assured the people that the general risk remains low in New York, on the same day in which he is saying that's the first meeting with the president, actually meeting with the various representatives of the major pharmaceutical companies. 11 days later, actually declares it a national emergency. And when you hear these people on the Democratic side mostly saying the president botched this, Well, would you have liked him to have called a national emergency on March 2nd, the day that he met with the pharmaceutical companies, and the same day when the governor of New York said there's no risk?
Now, we've with the vaccines, you've got several in phase 3. Phase 3 is the final trial. They're looking; some of them are looking pretty good. Just to tap down fears out there, it is not unusual to have adverse reactions to something, and it may be related to the drug. It may not be. When they go through the phase 3 trials, and on some drugs that are widely available to the public for something that, arthritis or something that a lot of people have, they may be going through 13, 20 different academic centers. You may have 3,000 or 4,000 people in each one of these trials at 20 different academic medical centers. They've got several thousand people in these trials, but even that, when you go from 30,000 to 30, 50, 75, 300 million, you're liable to find some people who have a reaction that you couldn't find in a group of 30,000. So that's just liable to happen. But they're going to try to make sure that it's available and safe for the vast majority of people.
Well, wouldn't the president be smart if he, with the vaccine is available, call a meeting and actually have himself vaccinated and Mike Pence vaccinated and invite Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and to have them vaccinated at the same time?
It'd be great video.
I don't think it would happen.
Yeah, just for the hot mic potential moments alone, I would be in favor of that idea all the way. Yeah, you mentioned Russia says they've already got one and China's working on it.
Sure.
Joe could just ask his son about the one in China. I'm sure he's got the inside track on it.
Lathan's coming up with great lines every day here. This is good stuff. But again, those are some things to put in the hopper, because what if the vaccine is available before the election? Will he just be accused of trying to rush it through? And we do have later this month, I believe, a debate. Now, again, I want to go around the table and see whether or not we'll actually have that debate. But I think that would come up, because if indeed the handling of the pandemic is the argument being used by former Vice President Joe Biden against the current president, Donald Trump, the Trump card, if you will, again, based on something we'll be talking about next week with Dinesh D'Souza, would be, well, I don't think I mismanaged it, but the bottom line is we now have a vaccine, so we can get back to normal.
Yeah, you're going to hear them accusing him of trying to rush a vaccine through, even as they're accusing him of not doing enough to get a vaccine finished.
Let's hope the American people can sort some of that out, but whatever.
Yeah, maybe we'll do this in the last segment on the debate. I actually do think there will be a debate. There's a lot of people who say, there's no way they're going to let Biden on the stage. Pelosi's already said we shouldn't debate and blah, blah, blah. I actually think there will be a debate. I think they have set the bar so low for Biden that his team probably sees it as an opportunity. Every time that he has a gaffe, every time, folks out there, make jokes about it, that just sets the bar low for his performance. They did the same thing with his convention speech. I mean, the bar is set so low for him. I mean, as long as he shows up with pants on and doesn't burn down the podium, the analysis is going to be how he outperformed expectations.
No, I think that's absolutely right. Yeah. The same mainstream media we've been talking about will say Biden did a wonderful job. I'm predicting this. Trump made all kinds of mistakes, and they're saying that before either one has ever said a word.
Well, and again, that will be September 29th. And will it be a drug test? Because remember, Joe Biden did really poorly in a couple of debates and all of a sudden did well in one debate. And so President Trump said, I want him to do a drug test because I think they figured out the if you will, the cocktail that worked out best for him. And just the fact that even the president would suggest that is, again, making both of you guys smile. But it just shows you that a lot of people say, what's going on here?
That's what makes Donald Trump Donald Trump.
Uncharted territory. I mean, can you even imagine, even back in the days of Bill Clinton, that George Herbert Walker Bush recommending that we have a drug test before we do a debate with Ross Perot and Bill Clinton or anything like that?
If he had known more, he'd have suggested a DNA test.
We're getting so many good lines here. I don't know what to do with it. Before we finish off this day, let's, if we can, get to one other article. What happens if neither Trump nor Biden win the Electoral College? And the good news is, in the Constitution, there is a solution, and that is to throw it to the House of Representatives. But then what if the House of Representatives can't resolve that, or the Supreme Court needs to resolve it, and we go into overtime? So that is a possibility, because it gets back to mail-in ballots and a whole lot of other questions that I thought we'd put on the table just before we wind down the day. And if you're keeping track, we have a lot of really great one-liners, so you need to go back and listen to this broadcast one more time. We'll be back in just a moment.
As protesters in cities across America call for abolishing or defunding police, we wonder, who are these people? If Black lives truly matter, why defund the protection that helps minority-owned shop owners and businesses to operate in these cities? Charles Blaine heads up two nonprofits, Urban Reform, which seeks to offer solutions that will revive American cities, and Urban Reform Institute, its associated think tank. He points out that the movement to defund police has a crucial flaw. The policy that it seeks would harm the minority communities whom the protesters claim to care about. Moreover, he writes in City Journal, those communities don't even agree with it. He cites a recent Gallup poll, which finds that a large majority, 81% of Black Americans, want to see police presence in their neighborhoods preserved at current levels or increased. Black Americans also respond that their exposure to local police is slightly higher than the national average. 32% say they see the police very often in their neighborhoods, yet 61% are okay with that level, and 20% want more police protection. Police budgets are being cut significantly in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Austin, Seattle, Minneapolis, and Portland. Houston, Chicago, and Newark are maintaining, even increasing spending on law enforcement. Charles Blaine says there's a glaring differentiator between these cities. Those with Black mayors or many Black council members have opposed demands to cut their police budget. Riots, looting, and the destruction of property are ruining lives and livelihoods in many of our cities. Blacks own and work in some of these businesses. Ask them if they want the protection of law enforcement. It's often white hipsters from affluent neighborhoods who say they hate police and want them abolished. Radical Black Lives Matter protesters and rioters from outside the neighborhoods they are destroying don't care about the devastation if it advances their revolutionary agenda. As lawlessness increases, law-abiding people know we need police. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Again, one of the questions that is surfacing more and more is whether we will know who the president is on the night of November 3rd, and the answer is probably not. Yesterday, we had Michael Anton on. We talked about his book and also posted the article, The Coming Coup, in which there's already doing some wargaming of what if we don't know on election night who won, and that's a possibility. And Alexander DeSantis puts it this way: in the event that neither President Donald Trump nor Joe Biden win an absolute majority of votes in the Electoral College, which doesn't happen until later, the race could be handed to the House of Representatives. In case you're not familiar and haven't read your Constitution in a while, the bottom line is, you might say, well, that means a Democrat would win, that it'd be Joe Biden, but the stipulation is simply this, that even though Democrats have a majority in the House, 232 representatives to 198, the actual vote is by state delegations, and that's where Republicans have a majority of 27 states compared to 23. So it's possible there. Now, in between all of that, let's go to the lawyer first, Lathan Watts. It's a possibility that, let's say on election night, it looks like Donald Trump won. You know, he wins again Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, a lot of Florida. And he looks like he's won. But everybody goes, wait a minute. In Pennsylvania, we have 100,000 mail-in ballots in a warehouse. We haven't counted those yet. That then postpones the decision, but then you have the reality that this last primary season, almost more than 500,000 ballots were rejected in Democratic primaries because they either had the wrong postmark, they were sent too late, they didn't have the right signature that matched, and a variety of other things. And so now you have this battle taking place between count every vote, even if it was mailed late and the signatures don't match, or go with what we already know happened on election night. And so this could get real difficult very quickly, couldn't it?
It could. Yeah, I think some in the press and some maybe on the left are kind of trying to lay the groundwork for this.
For the possibility.
Of it. Ever since Bush v. Gore, every election cycle, both sides have had armies of lawyers on standby, ready to go.
Right.
And it's just part of doing business now. So in that aspect, it's not uncommon since then. And yeah, the maybe the new factor, as you said, is the number of mail-in ballots because people don't want to come out and vote in person because of COVID or whatever. But that really gets down to sort of the election day returns actually do matter, because like the example you gave, there's 100,000 mail-in ballots that haven't been counted yet. Okay, well, did Trump win Pennsylvania by 150,000 votes? If he did, it doesn't matter.
Right. That's very important.
Even if Biden gets all 100,000 of those, which he's not, he still hasn't won the state. And so it's decisions like that frankly, at the state level, in most places, it's the Secretary of State who certifies the election returns.
Yes.
So you need to look at who's in office in your state and Secretary of State. Nobody, I think, had ever heard of Catherine Harris before she was Secretary of State in Florida in 2000. Then everybody knew who she was.
And they're changing some laws. Let me mention for our Georgia listeners right now, you had something happen in Georgia the other day where the law requires that absentee ballots that arrive after the election are collected and destroyed. Now you have a federal judge actually ordering the officials to count all ballots, even as long as they are postmarked by the election day, which means you could still have many of them trickling in. You have something similar now in Pennsylvania. For our listeners up in Ohio, there's a lawsuit challenging whether you need to verify the signatures. And at that point, the Trump administration said, okay, the campaign says we're going to challenge that one. So there's all sorts of battles taking place right now in these states, aren't there?
Yeah, like I said, it's sort of been just par for the course ever since Bush v. Gore. But
here we go.
But it is every election cycle, at least presidential election cycle. But it's also important for everybody to understand, and this is part of the conversation when you talk about nationwide polls. Also, it's not a national election; it's 50 independent state elections, and the states are supposed to be able to set the rules and the laws in their state for how elections are run. So I'd be interested to hear how this federal judge decided that he could just change the state law in Georgia.
Yeah.
Which gets back to another topic we've talked about, how important it is to have the right kind of people on the bench in federal judgeships. But I actually don't think, I mentioned it earlier, I'm starting to think that whoever wins this election is not going to be close in the Electoral College.
Yeah, and that would make life easy, wouldn't it?
It's hard for me to see how this doesn't just break one way or the other. I think the popular vote will still be close. I think, for the foreseeable future, the popular vote is going to be close. I tend to think now, and I'm not predicting who's going to win. What I'm saying is I think the winner in the Electoral College is going to win by a large majority.
And Lathan's point about these are state elections is important because people listen to so much national news, or they get so many national things where they're talking about elections, and they can get easily confused because a national media is talking about elections or mail-in ballots or something, and their state may be working significantly different than that. So they need to check with their local media and election people to find out exactly what's applying to them, not just hear what's going on in the major media, because it may be completely different.
I might just mention, again, this sounds self-serving, but the bottom line is my commentary today is on poll workers. And again, let me give credit to first John Fund and Kelly Shackelford. Kelly Shackelford first pointed that out, and then John Fund wrote about that we really need more poll workers. For this election to work effectively, we need about 900,000. You might say, well, where are all the poll workers we had last time? A lot of them are older. A very high percentage of them are over the age of 60, and I give you some of the facts and figures there. And so a good percentage of them actually say, I'm not sure with this coronavirus whether I want to work there. So there's a place for many of you to encourage you or your children to actually go and work those polls. Because once that happens, then some of the misdeeds that occasionally do take place are less likely, right?
I've heard some of those stories. I haven't seen it myself, but I've talked to people who have worked on them and seen things that they thought were very, very questionable, and they could not get anybody, the primary poll judge there to act on it and so forth. So, yes.
Let me just mention that at ipi.org, you have a very good interview you're going to do with Ian Murray that's coming up on September 24th. We'll have him on this program September 29th. But earlier, you also have a video which people could still watch, I think, with John Fund on
John
that issue.
Fund talking about mail-in voting and voter fraud, and a number of things that you should hear about as to how the Minnesota various elections have been decided in Minnesota for a senator there that ended up creating all kinds of problems and giving Barack Obama the one extra Senate vote he needed to pass Obamacare.
And again, we have something else that I might just mention, Lathan, First Liberty Live, and you can watch those interviews. But you're heading back out into California again, aren't you?
Leaving tomorrow, yeah, and we'll be out there. Like I said, we're taking the First Liberty Live on tour in California, kind of ground zero for the fight for religious liberty in America. So we're going to show, highlight the faces, the places, and the cases. So
So again, go out there, and if you see that van that says First Liberty Freedom Tour, you've got to go and shake hands with all those people and say, I've seen you on Point of View.
Yeah, come by and see me.
So again, that's firstliberty.org, ipi.org. And next week, as I said, we have Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Rafael Cruz, Michael Brown, Dinesh D'Souza, Max Lucado, Gary Auer, and Phil Robertson, to mention just a few. And so it'll be our truth team. So I hope you will join us then. Guys, thank you so very much. We have these articles on the website. I want to thank Andrew for his help behind the scenes, as well as for Steve. Enjoy the weekend, and I hope you'll join us on Monday for our truth team right here on Point of View.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.